Doctors of Reddit, what is your best how the hell did the patient survive story? Nurse here. Man in his 50s has brain tumor, has surgery to remove the tumor and hemocraniectomy to relieve intracranial pressure, bone taken from the skull and left out. Man walks out of this and has normal life. Man is walking around minding his own business. Building explodes. Shrapnel flies. Shrapnel hits man exactly where the burr hole was, travels through his brain, and gets lodged behind his eye. Man still alive. It baffles me that of all the people who could have been hit by shrapnel it happened to a guy with a missing skull part and it hit him exactly where it was missing. It baffles me even more that he survived all of this. I was a resident at the time. It was the end of my shift, and I walked past a guy walking to the front desk with a goddamn harpoon in his head. It came in from below the chin and got out through the top of the skull. Dude wanted to go harpoon fishing. There was an accident in the boat, and he shot himself. So he turned the boat around, sailed to shore, got into his car and drove to the nearest hospital, where he parked, and walked into the reception. He was completely conscious, and couldn't speak for obvious reasons, but he wrote down eloquently. I heard he was sent home the very next day, with no complications. When my dad was in residency, he was helping deliver babies. One came out stillborn. It was a rough time for everyone. Dad had to carry the baby away, and the entire time he carried the body away he did chest compressions. The baby started to breathe again. Dad had to bring the baby back. By all accounts, the likelihood of that working was extremely low, as they had already done everything they were supposed to for longer than they were supposed to do it. The parents had to go through some trauma therapy after that. That's all I know about that story. Had a patient who was out having drinks and fishing at night. Well, a wave hit and he stumbled right onto his pole, somehow impaling it through his eye and touching the back of his skull. Amazing that he survived that given the fishing pole-sized crater through his brain on the MRI. This guy lives in a Final Destination movie. Our friend blacked out driving home. The last thing he remembers is pulling into the other lane to pass someone. The car flipped twice, and they had to cut him out from the top. He was unresponsive and the EMTs were ready to call him DOA. He broke a vertebrae in his neck and shattered his hand. They were floored when they realized he was still alive. If it had been one vertebrae higher, he would have been paralyzed. As it was, he walked out of the hospital less than a week later. He had been wearing his seatbelt, which is literally the only reason he is alive today. A 20-something boy got shot in the head, straight on mind you. Dude came to the hospital awake and talking. I personally saw the CT scan with the bullet still in his skull. My favorite part was he claimed it was a drive-by shooting. I have never seen anything more centered on someone's forehead. Dead center, no joke. Seems highly unlikely that it was random. Not a doctor, but my father is. In his first rotation of residency, he had to assist in operating on an 8-year-old boy. Poor kid's dad was chopping wood, and he got in the way of the swing. Axe was lodged deep in his skull when he came into the ER. According to my dad, the boy survived, but the way he describes the father's devastation at having brutally injured his own son really makes me understand why my dad was always so uptight about things like fire, knives, and of course axes when I was a kid. My grandma's dad. That dude was in love with this girl, but was hated by her family, so they ran away into the woods. Little did they know, her father ordered his sons to hunt him down and bring back the daughter. So they did, and meanwhile they put a bullet straight to his chest. But that bastard survived the bullet, and later on created a lineage with that woman. Also he did many years in Galiotok, Yugoslavian version of Gulag, and survived everything. Truly one of a kind. Not a medical professional, but I used to hang around with one. They had a young woman brought in one night who had been stabbed 77 times and laid in a ditch for hours before someone saw her and called 911. She made a full recovery. My buddy was so shocked that she was alive and conscious that he called me from work to tell me about it. And then there was a guy who fell off the 3rd rung of a ladder, hit his head just right, and died instantly. Life is weird. Or, in this case, death is weird. One of my parents worked at an ER in a very large city. Most people who come into the ER in an ambulance are not walking in. Until one night shift this guy is walking in, escorted by one of the EMTs who had his hand on this guy's elbow. The EMT looked totally freaked out, Judas strolling with a slightly dazed look on his face. My parent wondered what was up, why is this guy walking, and how is this experienced EMT looking so freaked. Then the guy turned his head, and just the hilt of a knife was sticking out. Apparently it was a gang fight. This knife managed to miss every part of his brain that would have killed him. The story of Mary Vincent is insane. She was a teenager and hitchhiking on the west coast of the US, got picked up by a madman who raped her repeatedly over the course of a couple hours. Eventually she fought back and grabbed onto his arms. When she wouldn't let go, he chopped her arms off with a hatchet and threw her body into a ravine. For hours she climbed 30 feet up the side of the ravine sans arms and eventually made it to the side of the highway, naked, muddy, bloody with still bleeding stumps where her arms would be. Apparently she scared the first car off when they pulled over for her, but the second car brought her to the hospital after her 2-day-long nightmare. She's still alive like 20 years later and has 2 kids. She's a reffing badass. Not my story but my sister's. She had an infamous drug addict in her 50s admitted for endocarditis, heart infection, who had multiple previous admissions in the same hospital. During her stay the patient went through withdrawal and had not 1 or 2, but 3 cases of Torsades D points that needed defibrillation. Where most people don't survive not even one of these arrhythmias, this patient quickly recovered and was asking not a week later to be discharged cause she was ready to party again. My story would have to be a drunk 20-something that came after being stabbed on the forehead. We worked him up in casualty and found a large amount of air that had been sucked in his skull from the open wound. Patient clearly needed neurosurgical intervention, but got impatient and decided to abscond. We searched for patient and tried contacting him, but couldn't find him. Patient returned a week later being brought in by his mother because he kept complaining of headaches. On the trauma service just before Christmas several years ago, get paged for incoming 911 trauma at some time near midnight. Walk out of the workroom on the top floor of the hospital and I can see several blocks away the road lit up with cop cars and ambulances. Knew it was going to be bad. 20-ish-year-old comes in after being shot 7 times in the chest, awake, talking. Every single bullet missed every vital organ and he survived. His 16-year-old buddy gets shot just once in the chest and dies on the scene immediately. Cops show me their body cam of the scene with them doing everything they can to save this kid, but he was too far gone. Police later caught the 2 suspects who had been doing home invasions including another murder, shooting another robbery victim in the street, and knocking over several pharmacies. Wrong place, wrong time. 16-year-old waiting for Christmas and the rest of his life gone in an instant. Life just isn't fair. Had a guy come in with acute onset blindness in both eyes. Did a blood gas which showed a pH of 6.6 and bicarb of 0.5. To give some perspective for non-medical peoples, these numbers shouldn't be compatible with life. Normal blood pH is 7.35 to 7.45. And because pH is a logarithmic scale, this guy's blood was almost 10 times as acidic as it should be. The fact that he had no bicarbonate, acid-base buffer in the blood, in his system reflects that he had exhausted his usual compensatory mechanisms. We were convinced initially that it would turn about to be methanol poisoning, but all his toxicology turned out to be normal. He needed 10 days of dialysis in ICU, but eventually made a full recovery. We never were able to work out what caused his severe metabolic derangements. I wasn't in the hospital at the time, but a friend of mine was and this happened. A guy was high and tried to rob a girl in a bridge, but things didn't go as expected, and he tried to jump like 7 MTs down, which caused several fractures in both legs. As police and medical services were called, he tried to swallow a bladed object because prison didn't sound good. So there's this guy now with both legs in awful state, multiple cuts and a perforated esophagus that fell into cardiac arrest twice. But he survived, so there's that, I guess. During the night I remembered another 2 cases, maybe not as extreme, that I was present at. An 18-year-old had a 5 cm cut in the left side of his neck and part of his ear was missing. I always try to chat a bit with the patients to learn about it and to make him a bit more comfortable. Turns out this kid had schizophrenia and gave up trying to deal with the voices, so he stabbed himself. The other one was a guy with a pretty bad cut on his hand and my buddies, and I had to clean and stitch it. Once finished, we called the doctor in charge of us to take a look. He said it wasn't bad and then, you guys didn't move his head at all, right? No, why? Turns out he had been stabbed in the back of the head and the knife was still there. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.